Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Stephanie Figueros, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of short-term rentals and whether or not this is actually a good investment strategy for you. So let's get started. So let's talk about the pros of short-term rentals. A lot of the times people think about the cash flow, which definitely is one of the pros. You can make about 2 to 3 times that of LTR cash flow rates. So that's one benefit of short-term rental investing. Another one that a lot of people like is the fact that guests are not tenants. Your client or your guest avatar is there temporarily. And because they're there for less than 28 days, typically, they don't get tenant rights. So if they don't pay, they don't stay. Yes, there are crazy stories and horror stories about people overstaying their welcome. However, in that case, those situations where guests overstay their welcome, they do happen. Those are probably the worst of the worst stories, but a lot of the times it doesn't happen that way. And I think a lot of short-term rental operators, if they really take the time to screen their guests thoroughly, they can really avoid a lot of those situations from happening. Let's talk about another benefit of short-term rentals. It's called the ability to offset active income. There is something called a cost segregation study. As a disclaimer, I am not a tax professional, nor am I an attorney, so consult with the right professionals about this. But one cool thing about short-term rentals is that you can offset the active income. And with the cost segregation study, what happens is that you are accelerating the depreciation of your asset or of your home. Long-term rentals don't have this same benefit. However, you do have to actively participate or material participate in the operations of your short-term rental, and you do have to record this. There's something really cool called Reps Tracker. I'll have the link down below, and this is a really great way to track those hours. I used to track them with an Excel spreadsheet, which was terrible, and Reps Tracker is a better way to do it. So highly recommend for you guys who haven't tried Reps Tracker yet. You can also do this for long-term rentals as well when it comes to getting real estate professional, but leave that information up to your CPA, but something to think about if you haven't heard of that just yet. Another benefit with short-term rentals is that rates are adjustable. So you get to set the rates however you want. You can turn up the rate volume, you can turn it down during slow season. You get to dictate your rental rates, and there is no cap. There is no limit. So that sense of control and flexibility is definitely a pro with short-term rentals. Another benefit with short-term rentals is that they are just better maintained. They are kept clean, they're kept immaculate. A cleaner is constantly going into your home to clean. To be quite honest, it's probably cleaner than most of your guys' homes. Don't take offense to that. But short-term rentals are just better maintained and they're better cleaned because they have to be in order for guests to have a great stay. Another benefit with short-term rentals is that you're able to visit your short-term rental, and you're able to have that visit and everything that you do within that visit as a tax write-off. That is incredible. You could, if you had a property out by Disneyland, which I actually happen to have one there, any visit you have to the parks or anything of that nature is considered market research. So you are able to write some of that, at the very least, off. So I honestly think when it comes to short-term rental investing, you want it to be something that will match your lifestyle because it is active, it's not passive. Let's talk about the cons of short-term rentals. So one thing I just mentioned is that short-term rentals are not passive. That is a con. I see a lot of long-term rental investors struggle with this because you actually have to mind your property constantly. And there are ways to automate your business, to outsource, guest communications, vendor communications, but at the end of the day, somebody does have to keep tabs on the property, if it's getting booked, how it's doing, things like that. And one thing I really caution is if you're not ready to do the work that it takes to run a short-term rental, it might not be the strategy for you. So something to consider, but let's continue with the cons. Another con with short-term rentals is that it constantly needs maintenance. So things tend to break with guests. It just is what it is. So a lot of the times I find that I'm constantly having to have a handyman go in there and fix something. A little bit different than a long-term rental because it happens much more frequently. So ongoing maintenance is another con. Another con is that you are paying for all the utilities. In a long-term rental, a lot of the renters are paying utilities. With short-term rentals, you're the one that's paying that. So super important to have a smart thermostat, or at least one that you're able to control from a distance. I have Google Nest all over my short-term rentals. Some people do Ecobees. There's a lot of options. I truly think though, in order to be able to keep better tabs, it's important to have smart tech, including thermostats, so that, if a guest is shooting that down all the way to the 40s, you're able to take it back up a notch, because at the end of the day, you're the one paying those utilities. Another con with short-term rentals is that you are handling guests. So you're handling expectations. That's the bottom line. And that's not a bad thing in a way, but you have to understand that you are in the hospitality business. And if you think for a second that you might not be within short-term rentals, you're wrong. You're handling guests, it's hospitality. Actually, that's the number one thing you should really think about when you're handling guests, is that their expectations of you is that they want a clean, safe space that have amenities that work. So super important to know that if you are running a short-term rental or operating one or own one, you are now in the business of hospitality. Another con with short-term rentals are regulations. So this one is probably the biggest or the most talked about con. You can't do short-term rentals in every single market. And that's true. And a lot of the short-term rental regulations out there, they make it difficult. Some don't. However, regulations aren't necessarily a bad thing. The way I see it is that with regulations, you're really weeding out the people that aren't taking these things seriously and that are not committed to running this business the way it should be done. So, regulations are a thing. It's just something you need to account for when you are running a short-term rental, or if you're about to invest in one. That's the number one thing you should look at first before you even think about whether this market is for you. Look up the short-term rental regulations or the short-term rental ordinance. They're both interchangeable terms. The last thing with short-term rentals when it comes to cons is the seasonality. I am in vacation markets predominantly, and so I go through a lot of seasonality. It's part of the territory when it comes with these vacation markets, but it's not necessarily something to be afraid of. It's just something to expect and something to have reserves for. So a good example are the beach properties. When you're talking seasonal, and I'm not talking like Florida, I'm talking more of just the ones where you're making most of your money in the summertime, and in the wintertime, you can expect things to be slow. And sometimes long-term rental investors, they just get kind of panicky when it comes to not making money every single month. That's why you want to look at it from an annual basis instead. But seasonality is a true factor. Some of the metro markets aren't as hit hard with the seasonality like in the vacation space, but it's something you should still consider because you're always constantly trying to get bookings. So these are the short-term rental pros and cons. I think it's still a great strategy despite every single asset has its risk and its reward. So if you still feel like short-term rentals are for you, comment below. If you feel like, maybe this isn't the strategy for me, I still want to hear your thoughts. Thanks, and subscribe.